After a fierce 15-month battle against my stepfather, I finally claimed the home my mother built, securing her legacy and my long-awaited peace. The silence in this house is the loudest thing I've ever heard. It's a heavy-weighted silence, the kind that presses in on you from all sides. It's the sound of a war being over. For the past 15 months, this place hasn't been a home. It's been a battleground, a prize, a piece of paper in a legal file argued over by people in expensive suits who never knew the sound of my mother's laughter echoing off these walls. But now it's quiet. The only sound is the gentle hum of the old refrigerator and the whisper of my own breathing. It's mine. Finally, irrevocably, legally mine. I'm standing in the living room of 123 Maple Street. My feet are planted on the original hardwood floors my mom, Eleanor Carter, fell in love with 12 years ago. She bought this place all on her own 7 years before she ever met him. It was her sanctuary, her accomplishment, and then it became mine to defend. At 24 years old, I feel like I've just come home from a tour of duty. I look around at the thin layer of dust that has settled on everything, a gray film covering a life that was put on pause. Dust motes dance in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the windows like tiny ghosts celebrating the stillness. My hand, almost of its own accord, reaches out to the mantelpiece. There's a photo there tucked behind a small, dusty vase. I pick it up, my thumb gently wiping away the grime from the glass. It's her, my mom. The picture was taken on the front porch of this very house the day she got the keys. She's not looking at the camera. She's looking up at the roofline, a smile of pure, unadulterated pride on her face. Her hair is caught in the wind, and she looks so young, so full of life and possibility. This was before the illness, before him, before Michael Hill. A bitter, involuntary scoff escapes my lips. Michael, my stepfather, the 56-year-old man who was supposed to care for my mother and then for her memory. The man I privately, and with every ounce of contempt I could muster, called stepmom. He certainly thought this house was owed to him. I run my fingers over the wooden frame of the photo. This house is built from memories of her. I can still smell the ghost of her baking cinnamon and apple floating from the kitchen on a crisp autumn afternoon. I can close my eyes and hear the floorboards creaking upstairs as she moved around in her office. This living room is where we'd watch old black and white movies on rainy Sundays. Curled up under a massive Afghan, she'd knitted herself a bowl of popcorn balanced between us. Every corner holds an echo of her. The small chip in the window pane is from a stray baseball when I was 16. The faint water ring on the end table is from a glass of iced tea she left there on a hot summer day, just weeks before she passed. These aren't just walls and a roof. They are the physical manifestation of my entire childhood, of her legacy. And he tried to steal it. He tried to erase her, and by extension, me. My mother was a planner. She knew she was sick, and she didn't want to leave anything to chance, especially not when it came to me. Her last will and testament was ironclad. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office 2 years ago, a hollowed-out wreck of a person listening to the formal language that felt so cold and inadequate to capture the warmth of the woman we'd lost. But her wishes were clear. The house at 123 Maple Street, her non-marital property, was to be bequeathed directly and solely to her son, Maverick Carter. It was her final gift. Her way of making sure I would always have a foundation, a place of safety and memory to stand on as I moved through a world that no longer had her in it. I remember Michael sitting beside me in that office, nodding solemnly, a look of performative grief plastered on his face. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Of course, Maverick. It's what she would have wanted. We will honor her wishes." I was only 22, still reeling from the loss, and in my naivety, I actually believed him. I thought that maybe our shared grief would build some kind of bridge over the strained relationship we'd always had. I was so wrong. The man wasn't building a bridge. He was secretly laying dynamite at the foundations of my life. He saw my grief not as a wound to be tended, but as a weakness to be exploited. He saw my mother's legacy not as something to be honored, but as an asset to be liquidated. The warmth of her memory was replaced by the chillingly sterile language of legal filings and affidavits. The sanctuary she had built became a contested property. The fight was long and draining. It cost me money I barely had, forcing me to pour every last cent into lawyers' fees just to defend what was already mine. It cost me sleep and peace. For 15 agonizing months, I lived in a state of suspended animation, unable to properly grieve my mother, because I was too busy fighting her husband for the last piece of her she'd left behind. He tried to paint me as a greedy, ungrateful stepson. He told anyone who would listen that my mother had changed her mind on her deathbed, that she'd realized how much she wanted him to have the house. He was a master manipulator, a brilliant actor. He could cry on cue, his voice thick with fake emotion, as he recounted this fictional bedside scene. He almost made me doubt my own sanity. He almost made me doubt my mother's love. Almost. But I had the will. I had her words legally documented and witnessed, and I knew my mother. I knew that her love for me was the most constant, unshakable force in her life. She would never have left me with nothing. She would never have handed over our home to a man she'd only known for 5 years. A man she had loved, yes, but a man she knew deep down was not built of the same steady, honorable material as she was. And that's why I called him stepmom. A real stepfather would have honored his wife's dying wish. He would have protected her son. He would have been a guardian of her memory. Michael Hill did the opposite. He acted with the selfish, conniving cruelty of a storybook villain. So the name stuck. In my mind, he would never be anything more than the wicked stepmom who tried to steal my inheritance. But standing here now in the profound and victorious quiet, I know that he failed. The war is over. The dust is settling. And for the first time in a long, long time, this house feels like a sanctuary again. It's wounded and a little neglected, but it's still standing. And so am I. The quiet in this house now is an earned quiet. It's a silence born from the end of a storm, not the eerie stillness that comes before it. It's the kind of peace you can only truly appreciate after you've fought tooth and nail for it. But 15 months ago, the silence in these same walls was something else entirely. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. It was the suffocating silence of loss, a constant crushing reminder of the voice that was supposed to be here but wasn't. Let's go back. Back to a time when I was 22 and the world had lost all its color. It was 9 months after my mother's passing. 9 months of living in a fog. I was going through the motions, a ghost haunting the rooms of my own life. Get up, go to my part-time job at the library, stack books, come home, eat something I couldn't taste, sleep, repeat. Every day was a gray, featureless landscape of just getting through it. Grief is a thief. It doesn't just steal the person you love. It steals your sense of time, your appetite, your ability to feel anything other than that one gaping hole in the center of your chest. Michael was still living in the house then. He had his own rhythm of grief, or at least that's what I thought it was. It seemed more performative. He would sigh heavily whenever I entered a room. He would bring up my mother at calculated intervals, always making sure to frame himself as the grieving widower, the lonely man left behind. He'd say things like, "Eleanor would have loved this new show," or "I was just thinking about that trip we all took. Gosh, I miss her." It felt less like genuine remembrance and more like he was constantly reminding me of his own supposed pain, staking a claim on the tragedy. I was too wrapped up in my own misery to analyze it too closely. I just wanted to be left alone, so I let him have his stage. I retreated into myself, into the quiet corners of the home my mother had built. The day it all shattered started just like any other gray, featureless day. I came home from the library, the scent of old paper and ink still clinging to my clothes. I remember dropping my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the same bowl my mom had bought at a street fair years ago. The clatter was the loudest sound in the house. Michael was out somewhere. For that small mercy, I was grateful. On the entryway table was the usual pile of mail. Junk flyers promising unbeatable deals on pizza, a catalog for outdoor furniture bills, and a few stray sympathy cards that still trickled in from distant relatives who were just hearing the news. Sorting the mail had become one of my mindless chores, a 10-minute task that required zero emotional energy. I separated it into 3 piles, junk Michael's and mine. It was mostly junk and bills for him. I rarely got anything personal anymore. I was halfway through the stack when I saw it. It was a standard business-size envelope, brownish recycled paper. In the top left corner was the official seal of the county tax assessor's office. I figured it was just another piece of estate paperwork. Since my mom's death, our mailbox had been flooded with official-looking documents. Probate notices, letters from the bank, insurance forms. It was all just part of the grim bureaucracy of death. I slid it open with my thumb, not thinking anything of it. I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It was the semi-annual property tax bill for 123 Maple Street. My eyes scanned the familiar details: the parcel number, the assessed value, the amount due. It was all standard, and then my eyes landed on the line item near the top, the one printed in bold capital letters, property owner. My brain short-circuited. The world tilted on its axis. The name printed there was not the estate of Eleanor Carter. It was not Maverick Carter. It was in crisp, unambiguous black ink, Michael Hill. I read it again, and again, and a fourth time. I thought it had to be a mistake, a typo, some kind of bizarre clerical error at the county office. That was the only logical explanation. People make mistakes. Forms get processed incorrectly. I was sure of it. I felt a small spike of annoyance. Great, another bureaucratic mess I'd have to spend hours on the phone trying to untangle. I took a deep breath, ready to dismiss it as just one more hassle in a life that had become full of them. But my hands had started to shake. A cold, slithering dread began to creep up my spine, pushing past the initial denial. I looked closer at the document. It wasn't just the bill. It was a notice of assessed value for new owner. New owner. The words seemed to leap off the page and slap me across the face. I scanned the fine print. It listed a date of title transfer, a date that was only 3 months ago, a date that was a full 6 months after my mother had died. The fog of grief that had clouded my mind for 9 months began to burn away, replaced by the terrifying cold clarity of adrenaline. Suddenly I was seeing everything: Michael's performative sighs, his carefully placed anecdotes about my mother, his hand on my shoulder in the lawyer's office, that solemn promise to honor her wishes. It was a lie. It was all a lie. The whole thing had been an act, a long con. While I was drowning in grief, unable to see 2 feet in front of my face, he had been busy. He had been making moves. He had been stealing my home, my inheritance, my mother's final gift, right out from under me. The air in the room became thick and heavy. I couldn't breathe. I leaned against the wall, the rough texture of the plaster biting into my palm. The tax bill crinkled in my fist. This piece of paper wasn't a mistake. It was a declaration of war. He had fired the first shot, and I hadn't even known the battle had begun. I thought about the will, the clear, precise language, bequeathed directly and solely to her son, Maverick Carter. It was legally binding. It was her final command. How could this be? How could a simple tax bill override a will? It didn't make sense, unless he had done something illegal, something deceptive. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. He must have forged something, a document, a signature. He must have gone behind my back, using my distraction and my pain as cover. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. The cruelty was unimaginable. To not only defy the wishes of his dead wife, but to actively defraud her grieving son? What kind of monster does that? The man I called stepmom was no longer just a source of mild irritation or an obstacle in my home life. He had transformed into something truly sinister. He was a predator who had waited for the weakest moment to strike. He had seen my mother's death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. In that moment, standing in the silent hallway with that damning piece of paper in my hand, something inside me shifted. The passive, heartbroken 22-year-old boy vanished. The grief was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was now mingled with a new, powerful emotion: rage. A pure, righteous anger that burned away the tears and helplessness. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about my mother. It was about her memory. It was about her love. He wasn't just trying to steal lumber and drywall in a plot of land. He was trying to erase her final act of love for me. He was trying to rewrite the end of her story. And I absolutely, unequivocally was not going to let that happen. I smoothed out the wrinkled tax bill and placed it carefully on the table. My hands were steady now. My mind was sharp. The path forwards was terrifyingly uncertain, but the objective was crystal clear. I had to expose him. I had to fight him. I had to take back what was mine. I walked over to the filing cabinet where my mom kept all her important documents. I found the folder and inside my copy of her will. I pulled it out, the thick paper, a reassuring weight in my hands. I had the truth. I had her words. I sat down at the kitchen table, the tax bill on one side, the will on the other. They were 2 documents telling 2 completely different stories. One was a story of love, legacy, and a mother's final provision for her son. The other was a story of greed, deceit, and betrayal. I knew which story was true. Now I just had to prove it. The quiet of the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt like the calm before the storm, and I knew with every fiber of my being that a storm was coming. I was scared, yes, but for the first time in 9 months, I wasn't lost. I had a purpose. I was going to get justice for my mother. I took a deep breath, the paper of the will in one hand and the fraudulent tax bill in the other. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a war drum. I found him in the living room, sitting in my mother's favorite armchair, watching television like it was just another Tuesday. The casualness of it, the absolute normalcy, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. He had shattered my world and he was watching a game show. I turned off the television. He looked up, his face twisting in annoyance. Hey, I was watching that. I didn't say anything. I just walked over and placed the two documents on the coffee table in front of him, the will and the bill. His eyes flickered from one to the other. A tiny, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in his jaw. He knew exactly what this was about. "What's this?" he asked, his voice feigning confusion. "You tell me, Michael," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "One of these is my mother's will. It says this house belongs to me. The other is a tax bill that says this house belongs to you. I'm having a little trouble understanding how both can be true." He scoffed, a disgusting, dismissive sound. He picked up the will and waved it in the air. "Oh, this old thing, Maverick, your mother was sentimental. She wrote that years ago. Things change. The will was finalized after you married her," I countered, my voice rising. "It's legally binding. Her lawyer reviewed it. It is her final wish." Michael leaned back in the chair, a smug smirk spreading across his face. It was the look of a man who thought he had an unbeatable hand. People change their minds, especially when they're sick. They realize what's important. He reached into a drawer in the end table beside him and pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the table. It was a deed transfer. She realized that I was the one who took care of her. I was the one who was there for her at the end. So she made a new decision. She gave the house to me, a gift for my devotion. I picked up the deed. It looked official, stamps, seals, all the right legal jargon, and there at the bottom was a signature. Eleanor Carter, my mother's name. My stomach plummeted. For a terrifying second, I thought he was telling the truth. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe in her final, pain-filled days she had done this. But then I looked closer. I had seen my mother's signature thousands of times, on birthday cards, on school permission slips, on checks. It was a fluid, confident script. This was close. It was a very good copy. But it was hesitant. There were tiny, almost invisible stops and starts in the ink. It lacked the life, the flow of her real signature. It was a ghost, a forgery. I looked up from the paper, my eyes locking with his. She didn't sign this. His smirk faltered. Of course she did, I was there. No, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and certainty. She didn't. This isn't her signature. You forged this. His face turned dark. The friendly, bumbling stepfather act evaporated, replaced by something cold and hard. You need to be very careful what you accuse me of. Boy, he snarled, getting to his feet. He was taller than me, broader. He was trying to use his size to intimidate me. That's a legally filed document. This is my house now, and frankly, I'm getting a little tired of your attitude. Maybe it's time you found your own place to live. The threat hung in the air between us. Eviction. He was threatening to throw me out of my own home. The home my mother had bought and paid for 7 years before she even knew he existed. The home she had left to me to keep me safe. That was it. The last thread of doubt, the last shred of hope that this was all some horrible misunderstanding, snapped. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a coup. You're a thief and a liar, I said, my voice low and steady, and you're not going to get away with this. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Get away with it? I've already gotten away with it. The deed is filed. The house is mine. It's your word against a legal document. Who do you think they're going to believe, a grieving, emotional kid or me? He was right to be confident. I was just a 22-year-old kid. I had no money, no power. But I had something he didn't. I had the truth. I grabbed the forged deed off the table, along with the will and the tax bill. We'll see, I said, and I walked out of that room, out of that house, and didn't look back. I spent the next week sleeping on a friend's couch, calling every lawyer who offered a free consultation. On my new lawyer's advice, I filed a civil suit to challenge the deed and a criminal complaint for fraud and forgery. The process drained my savings and forced me to take out a loan betting everything on the belief that the justice system would see what I saw, that a signature, like a person, has a soul. And the one on that deed had none. The next year was a blur of legal battles, depositions, motions, endless paperwork. Michael's lawyers tried to paint me as a greedy, ungrateful stepson, trying to defy his mother's dying wish. But we held firm. My lawyer was brilliant. She told me to trust the process and to trust the evidence. Our entire case hinged on one thing, proving that the signature was a fake. Finally, the day of the civil trial arrived. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands trembling slightly. Michael was across the room, looking calm and collected in a suit, whispering with his attorney. He still thought he was going to win. Our star witness was a forensic document examiner, an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was walked through her analysis on the stand. My lawyer projected 2 images onto a large screen for the judge and jury to see. On the left was an image of my mother's verified signature taken from her passport application. On the right was the signature from the fraudulent deed. At first glance, the expert said, pointing a laser at the screen, they appear similar. But magnification reveals the truth. She zoomed in. Notice here on the verified signature, the letter E is formed in a single fluid motion. Now look at the signature on the deed. You can see what we call pen lifts. The writer has paused mid-letter, a sign of hesitation common in forgeries as the forger checks their work. She moved the laser. And here in the curve of the C in Carter, you see these microtremors. The lines are shaky not from age or illness, but from the slow, deliberate pressure of someone attempting to trace or imitate a signature they are not used to writing. It's the handwriting equivalent of walking a tightrope. A natural signature is a confident stride. The jury was leaning forward, captivated. Michael's lawyer tried to discredit her on cross-examination, but she was unshakable. She was a scientist, and this was her science. But my lawyer had saved the best for last, the final, undeniable nail in Michael's coffin. She walked to the clerk and retrieved one more piece of evidence. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. "The defense claims that Eleanor Carter signed this deed over to Mr. Hill as a gift shortly before her passing." She turned to Michael. "Mr. Hill, you testified that she signed this in your presence. Is that correct?" "Yes," Michael said, looking smug. "A week before she passed, she wanted me to be secure." My lawyer nodded slowly. Then she held up the document she'd retrieved. It was the official filing record from the county clerk's office for the deed transfer. "Then can you explain to the court," she said, her voice dropping for dramatic effect, "why this deed, which you claim a dying woman signed, wasn't officially filed with the county until a full 6 months after Eleanor Carter's date of death?" A gasp went through the courtroom. Michael's face went white. His lawyer frantically shuffled through his papers. They'd been so focused on defending the signature, they hadn't prepared for an attack on the timeline. My lawyer pressed on, her voice like steel. "The evidence is clear. The timeline is impossible. The signature is a forgery. But more than that, the story itself is a lie. A dead woman cannot sign a document. A dead woman cannot file a deed. This wasn't a gift. This was a calculated theft executed against a grieving family. This was fraud. It was over. You could feel it in the air. The whole lie had been built on a foundation of sand, and the truth had just washed it all away." The judge's verdict came swiftly. The deed transfer was declared fraudulent, null and void. The ownership of the house was reverted to my mother's estate to be executed according to her last will and testament. It was mine. Legally, completely, and irrevocably mine. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I started to cry silent tears of vindication and exhaustion. But it wasn't just a civil victory. The evidence was so overwhelming that the district attorney's office pressed forward with the criminal case. In a separate trial, Michael Hill was found guilty of felony fraud and forgery. I watched as the man who had sat in my mother's armchair and threatened to make me homeless stood before a judge. His mask of confidence was gone, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed look of disbelief. He truly believed he could lie his way through anything. He was sentenced. As the bailiffs came forward and placed him in handcuffs, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. There was no remorse in them, only pure, venomous hatred. He was furious that he'd been caught. He was furious that a 24-year-old kid had outsmarted him. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I just met his gaze and I held it until they led him away. And now I'm back, standing in the quiet living room of my house, In my hand, I'm holding the new legally sound deed. My name is printed on it clear as day, Maverick Carter, owner. I run my hand over the dusty frame of my mother's photograph, the one taken years before she met him. She's smiling, happy and vibrant. For 2 years, this house felt tainted. It was a place of conflict, a prize to be won. But now that feeling is gone. The silence is no longer heavy with tension. It's peaceful. I honored her wish. I fought for her legacy. I took back the final gift she ever gave me. The man who betrayed her trust, who tried to erase her memory and steal from her son, is in a place where he can't hurt anyone else. The battle is over. Justice was served, and here in the home my mother built, the healing can finally begin.